Hey, what's up guys? My name is Cherno and welcome to episode 78 of Game Programming. So we're going to talk about this whole particle thing here. So a lot of you guys pointed out that this was a big flaw here, and I'm glad you did, because that was partly, I just wanted to show you guys what I meant here. So what we could do, my original intention was to actually make this static, which of course changes the entire scope of things, because if it's static, that means that there's only one instance of this particles array list in all of history, okay? So in other words, if we make this static, that means that there's only going to be ever one instance of this, and here it is, okay? That changes a lot of things, And we could develop that onwards. There's so many ways we could do this whole particles thing, but actually someone mentioned a particle emitter object, and that really got me excited, because I'm like, oh my god, that's such a good idea. And I didn't think of that, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. I should give credit, shouldn't I? Okay, let me find that person who suggested that. Right, where are you? Emitter, I'm just gonna search Control F emitter. So there's one person who said it. So Sam Brev said it. And as far as I can see, he's the guy who suggested it, yeah. So Sam Brev, thank you to you for suggesting this, because this is an awesome idea and I want to use it. Okay, so particle. In fact, we might just call it emitter. I'm thinking right now, because I think I might want it to emit other things instead, not just particles. So let's pop that into entity. Let's just pop that into entity, not into particle, okay? And I'm thinking quickly. Let's see, do we want to have it for other things? What else could we emit though, right? I mean, particles, oh, it could be like a spawner. What if it was like a spawner? Sorry, this feels like a live stream, doesn't it? Entity, like a spawner kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, it could spawn mobs, it could spawn anything, really. Emitter, spawner. I think I want to call it spawner, okay? So now it's no longer Sam Brev's idea. No, I'm kidding. So this is essentially an emitter, but instead of calling it a particle emitter, it can emit other things instead of just particles, right? So this spawner is basically going to be like the parent of any entity. So it is going to be an entity in itself, okay? But what spawner is going to have is an array list of entities itself, okay? So private list entity, entities essentially. So the spawner is almost like a group of entities, but what's going to happen is they're probably going to come out at the same time. They're actually going to appear and be created at once, okay? Did I not import that? Import. Okay, so now that we've made this entities thing, let's take a look at our projectile over here. Sorry, not projectile. Let me close this stuff that we don't need. Let's take a look at particle over here, right? So we've got a private list of particles. We're going to get rid of that completely. All we're going to keep is a life and the amount. In fact, we probably don't need that at all. In fact, I might even just delete this entire constructor, okay? And I'll hit Control-Shift-O, which will basically just remove the imports that I'm not using, and all that stuff, and import things that I need that I haven't imported yet, but obviously in this case everything's imported. Okay, and so what's going to happen here is this stuff is all fine, okay? The update's all right, the rendering logic is awesome, and the actual this thing is indeed good for one instance of the class itself. So that's great. We don't need to touch this at all right now. One thing I do want to do though is we should really somehow, the thing is, we want to remove this eventually, but we can't right now because we haven't, I don't think it has a valid reference of level in it. So you'll see in entity, what we have in entity is, not this entity, what we have in our entity class is an init method, which basically initializes, quote unquote, initializes this entity class. And the way it does that is essentially by setting our current level equal to, or in other words, setting our level object here equal to our current level so that we can use it throughout our entire hierarchy here. So level isn't set here. We have to work out how to do that somehow. But more or less, what I want to do is, let's see here. So when we make a spawner, what we want is we want an X and Y coordinate on our map. And we probably want an entity for it to spawn. And probably and the amount of entities we need to spawn. Okay, so since it is an entity, we'll hit this.x equal to x, this.y equal to y. Now entities, how can we handle this? So yeah, okay, so I'm just thinking. So let's go for in I equals 0, I is less than amount, I plus plus. And now we have to think of a way to actually make entities appear. So the way that I'm probably going to do that is actually just use an enumeration so that people can decide what kind of entity they want to spawn. So public enum, and I don't think we've used enumerations before, so I'll explain that a little bit. And we'll call it type, I guess. And the types that we'll create are probably, well, for now, all we really need is particle, but for mobs, I want people to be able to spawn mobs as well. We haven't really made any AI mobs, so I will put mob in there just for now as like a placeholder, and I'll leave particle in there. That's it. Okay. So what this does, I don't even know if we need the semicolon there. I don't think we do. But anyway, what this basically does is creates a custom variable, kind of like an integer, right? But it creates, in fact, this is pretty much an integer because it maps these two to integers. But the point is it creates a custom variable called type, and the values of type can be equal to the following, okay? So it's like we're creating a custom variable, and these are all the possible choices. So it's pretty simple, and it's pretty versatile as well. So obviously, since we've created this variable now, we need to actually create, we've created the variable type, now we need to actually create a variable out of it. So let's go ahead and create a type called, we'll just call it type, okay? And now we're actually creating it here. And instead of entity E, let's actually put the type into here. And of course, this is public, so people will be able to set that to whatever they want, and you'll see how that works in a minute. We don't need to make it static to have it work. Okay, so the deal with this is, in fact, let me probably just, before I start typing this code here, which is going to be quite simple, but before I do that, let's go into our level and actually start spawning a few of these. So I'm going to open our level class. And over here in, I believe we're using I think we're just using this one, right? Let me quickly check. I'll just print running and we'll see if yeah, okay. So print's running to the console, so we are using this constructor and not this one. So over here, what I'll do is I'll just add a new spawner essentially into the level somewhere. So I'll go ahead and hit up new spawner. Now the player is at, if we go back to our game class, our player spawn is at 19,62, okay? So that's times 16 because we have 16 size sprites. So our tile coordinate here is 1962. Let's maybe make a spawner at 1662, so it's just to the left of the player. So 16 times 16 times 16, and what was it? 62 times 16. Okay, and then we obviously have to specify a type. So what we can do is just type spawner.type particle, and then the last one is the amount, so we'll make like 50, okay? And as you can see, that's sort of how we access enumerations. So note that we don't need to make it we don't need to make it static or anything. A lot of people make these static just because of the way that if we wanted to access this from anything else without having to call an instance of this class, yeah, we would have to make it static. But an enumeration, think of it as an inner class. In fact, if you know about inner classes, you probably know about enumerations very well. But it's kind of like that, right? You don't actually need to instantiate the class to access this enumeration. In fact, when you compile this code, when you actually package it into a jar, Java actually separates it into a different file into a different class. So what it essentially does, and I'll show you really quickly, but if we right click on entity, for example, and hit new, we can choose enumeration, and then we can actually make it, you know, type, for example, and you can see that we get public enum type, and then that's where we type mob and particle, okay? And that's what it is, okay? That's actually what the compiler does for us. But because we'll only be using this in the spawner class, it just makes a bit more sense, and it just kind of cleans your workspace a bit if we put it into the actual spawner class. So let's delete that. But that's how it works. So that's how the access to it sort of works. So now that we've specified the type particle, let's actually do something about it. Let's go ahead and say that, let's first of all set this .type equal to type. I don't think we'll actually need it, but yeah, we probably won't, but just in case, I will declare it as a global variable here. So for the amount, okay, let's create new instances of this type. So in other words, if our type is equal to type.particle, then we actually need to create a bunch of particles, don't we? So new particle xy life, of course, will be x and y. Now the life is questionable, okay? The way that we specify the life might be a bit different, okay? And this is going to be very subjective here because it really depends on your opinions on how you want to do this. I'm literally just going to pop 50 in there for now. We'll talk about that later, how we can specify life. Because of course, life is something that doesn't apply to a mob, but does apply to a particle. So that's where we get sort of, I guess, sidetracked, as in, it doesn't really become very universal. So let's do this for now. So that's great, okay? What it will do is create new particles at that location. Now that's all great, okay? We've created a bunch of new particles, but they're not assigned to anything, which means that their render method isn't going to be run. Nothing's going to happen here, right? Wrong, okay? What we need to do is actually add these particles to the level. So we can do that by hitting up level, because of course spawner does extend entity, level add new particle, okay? And that will ensure that they do render, and they are actually added as separate entities. Now, it's a bit different than what we did before, which is where we had a separate array list. We could, of course, make a separate array list just for particles in level, and then we could do something like level add particle, and that would add it to that specific list. But, you know, there's not that. I could see a bunch of reasons why you would want to do that. For example, maybe some effects aren't applied to particles, or you know, you want to handle them differently. In fact, I think I will do it that way, just because of a number of reasons. So let's make a new, because we do have projectiles in a separate list. Let's make a new one, a new array list. I'm just going to copy it here, and I'm going to call it particles, or particle, and I will call the actual list particles equals new array list, and of course we'll set the type to be a particle. Okay, so now that we've created that, instead of actually having to add different add methods for a lot of things, we could simply detect what type of entity the user's trying to add and add it to its specified list. So in other words, what we could do is say if E is an instance of a particle, and of course particle can be subclass, so that will apply to all particles when we make future types in the future. Future types in the future, that is some solid grammar there. Not only grammar, not English, but anyway. So if it is instance of a particle, then of course we'll initialize it as well. In fact, we could probably just put that up in the global thing, because that will happen no matter what. But instead of adding it to here, right, we're going to actually add it into the particle list. So if E is an instance, if the entity that is supplied is an instance of a particle, then we can add it to the particles list. So particles.add E. Okay. Right. Okay, and we need to cast it to a particle, of course. Actually, wait, that shouldn't even be happening, because it is a particle. Extends entity. Oh, yeah, no, of course, because I've set them to be particle. My bad. Okay, so we can cast a particle, and of course this is absolutely safe because we've checked if it is an instance of that. Else, we'll do that, but also I want to add one more here, and that's an else if. So else if E is instance of a projectile, yeah, then we can add it to the projectile list, which is what we've done here, okay? But I'm going to shift that up literally here, okay? And change this to E, and we will have to cast that to be a projectile. Okay, and that removes the entire need for this. Okay, really, really cool and really, really simple. Sweet. So obviously in the add projectile method in our mob class here, we need to change the add projectile to be simply an add. Okay, and then the code will figure out what type of entity it is and add it accordingly. So now that we've done this, let's not forget to actually add our projectile, our particles into the level by adding the spawner. So add new spawner at that location. Okay, that's all we need to do. Now, the spawner itself is an entity. Okay, and if you notice over here, if you notice in our little add thing, we're not separating a spawner, okay? We'll just keep the spawner as a normal entity as we would with a mob, for example, okay? So let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so we get a nice little crash here because I probably forgot to do something. Okay, we've got a null pointer exception. That is interesting. So let's get out of this. And the reason for null pointer exception in level is, of course, because this init thing hasn't run properly. So let's go ahead and go back to level. And check this out. So we do create a new spawner and we do add it. So we should be initializing it. And the reason, of course, for this entire problem is because we do initialize this here, of course, but and that works obviously. But the problem here, the big problem here, is that we're actually calling in the constructor. So what happens is, of course, our code executes this constructor first. Where are we? Our code executes this constructor first, right? And it's trying to add it to the level, but it doesn't actually exist yet. Okay, the level isn't specified yet. So there are many ways to work around this. The best way to probably do it is to simply add a level into the constructor here. So if you want to make a spawner, then you're gonna have to actually specify a level. So in this case, we'll specify this. Okay. So let's go back over here and type in level, and then we can simply init this with level. And it doesn't matter if it gets initialized again, that's fine. But the idea here is that it will know which level to add this particle to, okay? So let's go ahead and start that up. And what we should see here is a bunch of particles, and we do not. So let's figure out why that's happening. So we seem to be adding them here, and that is type particle, so that's fine. Let's delete this array list first of all. That doesn't need to be here anymore. And in fact, the reason that, let's clear those imports. The reason that it's probably not doing anything is because in level, of course, we did actually create an extra array list here called particles, but we don't call that anywhere. So in update, let's make sure that we do actually update. I should make an array list of array lists, shouldn't I? That'll be a lot simpler. So particles.size, and let's update them. And let's do exactly the same thing in the render. Okay, so you gotta remember to do this stuff. Otherwise, you'll be wondering why your code isn't working. So, the only thing we'll change here is render, and we'll change that to screen. Okay, so let's check that out now. And as you can see, our particles do indeed appear here. Okay, and if I run the game again, there they are. Okay, now that might be a bit of an awkward situation to add them in. Just because, of course, as soon as we start the game, it kind of does this, and that's just a bit weird. But what you'll see over here, if we go to spawner and particle rather, what we could do instead, for example, let's get rid of a bunch of this stuff. Hang on a minute, where are we? Level. Okay, so what we'll actually do right now is, let's see if we can adjust the amount. So if we set that to 2, let's just verify that we do indeed get 2 particles. 1, 2, awesome. Let's change it to 1. We should get 1. There it is, 1 lonely particle. And if we change it to 500, well, we should get 500 particles, and as you can see, we do. Okay, so that is how that works. We'll talk a bit more about actually using it to our advantage, this particle engine thing here. And also, of course, this solution isn't really good. It's only good if we're actually, well, actually, no, it's fine, because but it is a bit limiting, because we can only call this if we are inside a class that has access to level, which is, to be honest, all the entities. So what we are specifying by doing this is essentially saying, oh, okay, only an entity can spawn a spawner. Okay, and that might not be 100% realistic, so we probably revisit that next time. But otherwise, I'll probably see you guys tomorrow with another episode on actual the life stuff, because we haven't covered life at all yet. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this episode of game programming. It's a pretty long one, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.